Good morning. Okay, let's get started where we left off. So this is the picture we are looking at. So now we are in a position to talk about how the shell processes a command. Okay. So let's see. In a bash shell, right? In a command prompt, you are typing in ls. Let's say ls. So ps, we do ps so that you can see the task ID, right? Do ps. And you can see the task ID changing every time, right? So obviously every time there's a task created, but of course the shell task itself has the PID its own and keeps the same. So how is this, what's the underlying process, right? So for example, if I give two commands, that's just a series of two commands really. So let's go here, and you have, so in this case as well cover this one, 3800. Okay, so you have a bash how shell processes a command. For now, let's limit ourselves to simple commands. Bash, and this time it happens to be 3800 PID. So bash is, what is it doing? It's waiting for user input, right? So you type in the command prompt, and you type in, you are typing in the ps command or ls command or whatever command you are doing, right? So that's a user input. User input at command line. So bash processes and sees that, hey, this is a new command, and it is a valid command because it can see that there's a ps available. It didn't work last time. Yeah, bin ps. That's a bin ps available. So I'm ready to execute this command. This is not a shell built-in. There is a echo, but the echo is also a shell built-in. How do we know? Let's do this. ps echo ps. See, ps command is 3911. Echo command, after that when you run ps, see, 3912. So it did not occupy a process. Instead of this, if you do ls, for example, ls, I'm just going to output to junk dev null so that I don't need to see it in the screen. Look at that, 3916 followed by 3918. If you run any number of times, I know it's not a very reliable approach all the time, but so you should run several times. See, 1921, which means this is the 3920, right? So this one did occupy a process. It did use the process task ID, whereas ps echo is a shell built-in. That's why it does not use a process. So the shell itself processes that, okay, directly. You can also do man echo. Let's see that. See that, just to be safe, there's a bin echo as well, but that's not used by the shell. So let's see some other command. ps, how about environment command? Let me redirect environment to null, see what happens. That probably creates more confusion because of redirection, I think. Let's see. Use echo. Let's try echo. Yeah, see, for echo, I guess the environment, it does use a command, looks like. So even here you can see after echo, The echo did not consume your task. Okay, so right now we are interested in commands that consume your task. That's not part of a shell built in, rather it's external command. Okay, so shell realizes here that the PS is a external command, so it goes ahead and forks. How do you want to mention that? It invokes fork, system call fork. Now you have parent bash, right, and child bash shell. This is the original one. Okay, PID 3800. Maybe I shouldn't even draw it, so this one is whatever the new task ID, new PID something 3818, let's say. So this is a parent kind of gets a value of 0. Guys, can you focus here? If you want to talk, please go outside. Okay, you're not required to be here, please. Let's not disturb others and me. So this guy gets the PID of this fork returns a PID of 3818 to this. So that's how we know it's a parent. Okay, parent gets a child's PID and child gets a 0. Okay, so then after this the child, since it knows which one is a parent, which one is a child, this guy goes and does exec, and we'll see the details soon. So it invokes exec PS, then this task becomes the PS. I don't know whether different color helps. So now instead of bash, it becomes the PS. Still the PID is same thing. So then after that, this parent really kind of doing the wait. There is a system called wait. Okay, so it's basically waits for return code from the child. Questions? So every command involves a fork and exec. Okay, what's it in this exec? Exec was designed in C language, so for different parameters you can invoke exec system call with different type of parameters. So that's why they define several function names. They all perform the same thing. Okay, you can either list the actual arguments. If you have variable number of arguments, you can use this last one. That's why that V stands for. These ones are variable number of arguments. You can put it in the array and invoke them, or if you know exactly the number of arguments, you can use the first 3. This is the variable number of arguments. Variable number of arguments you want to pass in, right? Command line. Variable number of command line arguments. You can set up your own array and you can put this stuff in, and then you can invoke the exec appropriate convenient exec function call. Okay, so what is exec function call do? Exec function call basically converts one process, one command to another, one tool to another. See, it was a bash that was running. When it does exec, it becomes the PS command. Okay, it will never return back to this bash shell. Okay, this is a child. Okay, parent is here. Okay, so if this will help, maybe I should just draw this in different colors. So the fork, right, this one, this is a child. Okay, hopefully that helps little bit. Okay, this is for the child processing of that PS command. Any questions? No clue? Yes, it's usually only one or the other, right? If you understand half of it, you will ask me a question. You have no clue what's going on, or you understand completely. Okay, I'll assume you understood completely. Okay, so the next one is what happens when you give a complex command. So what do I mean by complex command? Pipe commands, for example, right? ls wc minus l. What do you think? How many processes do you think it will occupy? ls is a tool, wc is a tool, they are not shell built in. 2, right? Let's see. 4111 12 4115 4116. Okay, so let's check the relationship between them. How am I going to do? Let's try that. Okay, what am I doing here? So that I know what's going on, basically. So in fact, I'm going to do PS minus F. Okay, that didn't work. We'll write it in multiple lines. That's okay. Sleep. Hopefully, others won't run it. That's okay. It's not a big deal. PS minus F. Okay. That should give us pretty good idea. That's our original shell. Right, so then see, the both commands, this command and this command, both are children of the original shell. Okay, so both are so this original our shell really is the parent of both. And it forked and created this, then again it forked and created this. Okay, in fact this detail probably will cover it a little bit later. So but just I want you to know it does use two task IDs, and you can see the 2 task IDs. Okay. Okay, let's not dig deeper than this for now, because we will come back, when you are using the pipes, we will come back and look at it again. Okay. Okay. Once we create these 2 tasks, right? Once we create these 2 tasks, separate tasks, how do they communicate each other? See, because they don't share anything. Once you do fork, really they don't share anything, right? Global variable, local variable, everything is totally separate, each task, right? So if at all you want to communicate between them, signal is one mechanism. Later I will cover a few other mechanisms too. So signal is one mechanism. So that's what this is a very old mechanism. We'll cover that first. You can send a signal. Basically, an indication, an integer number, a signal, and you can send a signal to other process, and we will look at it using these 2 examples, control C1 and alarm.c. Where is it? Alarm.c. So control C1 and alarm.c. Okay, control C1. You can specify how to. It's kind of a little bit confusing how to process each signal. So when you say control C, when you're running the command, that's a signal by itself. Signal interrupt, and then signal terminate is, I think, if somebody kills, I think, kill signal. This is a kill signal coming from, you know what? Let's check that. Man sig int. Okay, signal. Let's see, it's listed here. No, there is or signal. Perhaps this is another way. So signal.h. Let's go check the signal.h, right? I believe it's here. User include signal.h. Okay. What were you looking for? Sig int. So it's not here. Sig int. Sig. Is that correct? Sig int. Yeah. So, or it may be here. Sig int. So that's where it's defined. It's defined in different place. So they are including through the header files, including some other header file. That's how it's working. So you can see next one is what? Sig term. Termination. So what's the difference? Sig interrupt is control C, and the sig term maybe -9. We'll find out. Okay, you can play with that too. So you can specify a function when it's getting a signal, it will print this message. Okay, so this is a registration. Basically, the main function, we are registering how to handle control C. Okay, if you don't do this, when you do control C, program terminates, right? If you do control C, program terminates, right? So here we are kind of capturing that signal, and we are asking for running this function whenever the signal comes. Maybe you can just run it. That will help us understand more. Linux code control C1. Why is it printing hello world? Right here is the infinite loop. Okay, now I am ready to press the control C. That's the message you get. So what do we do within the function, which says how it got signal, that signal number. Then we are returning signal handling back to default. Okay, default is to quit. So if you do control C, it program ends. Yes, so that's how they are showing basically. So basically first control C to catch using this function, right? This function to just avoid the infinite catching, they are resetting to default handling. So what will happen if I do this? If you don't reset, okay, I am not resetting, so every time I press control C, okay, you can count how many times you press control C if you want. So let me try another one, another way to end that program. So ps minus fu virasam. Okay, so there's a control C program. By the way, by default, ps minus f displays only current TTY task. See, when I did ps minus f or just ps, right? That's my current TTY. See, TTY, that's a current TTY. Okay, It has, each TTY has its own number, okay? So number and this the fancy setting, dev device pseudo terminal stream, I think it's called, and 12, number 12. Everybody will have different number, and in fact if you can do to dev TTY to see, sorry, dev PTS to see who wants different ones. So several people logged in, so their TTY numbers. Okay, back to PS command. PS shows only that. But I want to see all my tasks. You can say that. PS minus FU, U, user ID. So now you can see other TTY right here. Other TTY tasks also. Show me all my tasks. Okay? Okay, so now we want to kill this one. So you can do kill -2 4379. Let's try that. So same thing, same effect by sending with the kill signal. Yes.
What is -2? TTY, what is that?
TTY.
Yeah, what is that?
It's basically your terminal session. It's a old, right? Teletype something. It stands for TTY. Okay. Remember the old days. You have the main machine. Then you have the terminals connected to it directly. The dumb terminals, so-called dumb terminals. The green 18 to 25 screens. So that each one is a TTY. 1, 2, 3, like that. They're already numbered. It's a hardware connected and all that stuff. Now we are all doing remote sessions, right? So they had to come up with some mechanism. They came up with this pseudo terminal streams. Since now it's a very flexible environment, it creates whenever needed and all that. So still the same philosophy exists. Okay, it kind of looks like a big machine with the multiple terminals connected. User server. Pseudo terminal, because it's not a real terminal connected to the machine. So don't quote me for it. That's what it sounds like. I vaguely remember reading something like that. Okay. So when you did kill -2, it sends a signal 2 to the task, right? That's why we got that -2 right there. So now let's try just to kill, straight kill. 15. Okay, that 8 is different. I think the 8 is control slash, I think. Control backslash, that's what I thought. So sig term, I don't know what that is. Sig term versus sig kill. Sig kill, SIGINT, right? SIGTERM by default. Shell command kill signal SIGTERM by default. It didn't do that. It did 15, right? Or maybe it is a SIGTERM. SIGTERM is at 15. SIGTERM user include star. Yeah, it is 15. Okay. Very good. It is 15. So SIGINT is, these are kind of integer constants. Okay. That's a 2. That's a 15. Next to 1. We want to see when we did this. See, that killed already. Still there. I don't know why it said no such process. How does that make a difference? Let's do PS. 4. Oh, okay. I stopped it. Okay. Okay. Thank you. So 4487. Okay. That's a 15. So if you want a sure kill, this is a polite way to end a program. Okay. Politely asking it. When politeness doesn't work, you Go to the next level. Okay. This has system defined, obviously that's gone. PS minus F, kill minus, each one has some meaning. Several of them are predefined. 4, 5, 5, 3. Yeah, see, that's a different meaning. That's an internal meaning. It crashes, but it's really, internally it's a different meaning actually. It's predefined meaning there. So, it treats as if there's an illegal instruction in the code, so that creates a signal, internal signal or something. So minus 2 is what gets created when you kind of press Control C. Okay, Control C, and see, this is control and backslash is a sure kill. See, I don't know what signal that is. Secret equivalent to -9, you think? Yeah.
Well, there was a couple of
Secret, okay. Yeah.
there was a couple of
Yeah, so let's try secret. If it's 9, secret is 3. Okay. So see, we didn't catch 3, see? We didn't catch 3, so we can try catching it. Let's try one more thing here. Okay, kill minus 3. Do you think this will kill? Because no, that is 4. 3 we didn't catch. Secret is something we didn't catch. So see, the 2 and 3 really they're not meant for sending signal from somebody else. It's for really for keyboard input. When you do press Control C, it's for SIGINT, interrupt. Okay. So 3 is for control and backslash, it's kind of like sure kill type of thing for keyboard input. But you can use it for other places too. But from other terminal, usually we do kill something, a task, you want to stop it, kill it. You can kill and the task number, that will send 15. And if you want sure kill, if it doesn't respond, you can do kill -9 and the PID. Okay. So if you want to kind of capture 3 too, you can do that, right? Control C. So what do you want to do? So let's try. Okay. So now kill 3, 4, 5, 9, 0. See whether that will work. Yeah. Okay. So if you want this to not to go on forever, that's why we want to return back to default handling. In fact, we want to return to default handling of the SIG, whatever signal we did, right? You can do this forever. You can play with this forever. Okay. Bottom line is you're using one integer. There are several of them predefined ones, and I think there are few user defined. One, two. Control C2. Yeah. Okay. This is SIG action. I will not cover this one. That's a little bit advanced version. So let's go here and see how many are predefined.
Would it be a way to just
There you go.
pass all the signals and be unable to stop the process?
You can put a for loop and try to catch. Few of them you cannot catch. There are 9, for example. 9 you cannot catch, unblockable. That's a sure kill. Okay. You can try to do signal, but it is not. You cannot override. Okay. Because if you do that, even the system administrator may not be able to kill. See, runaway task, right? So let's say something is occupying a lot of memory and stuff like that. So you want to kill a task. So looks like here it's a very nice description here. Not a very detailed, but there is a description. Yes.
Where is it like actually like defined as unblockable? I mean, other than right there, but I mean, where is it like actually implemented as unblockable?
It's implemented probably in that signal, right? So when you remember, signal is what we use for registration. See, when you are invoking the signal, which is defined here, it's kind of I would expect that to be kind of library, or is it really Unix standard signal? Signal and kill are system calls.
So if I like overwrote or edited that file, like I would be able to make it unblockable?
Yeah, but you are modifying the operating system probably. Linux operating system. It doesn't look like a C standard library. This seem to be lower than that. See, because signal and kill are really system level system calls. There are only 20-25 system calls typically. At least the most popular ones: file open, read, write. Like exec, fork, signal, kill. This type of ones. So. Table, which one is good we want to do? Complete list of system calls with description. Not a lot of description. Fork, read, write, open, close, wait. Remember the wait we talked about? I think that's a create file, link, unlink. Link, unlink is our hard link. Exec, change directory, time, make chmod. You can see a lot of these things are get PID. Little bit more than 25. Pass, utime. There you go. Lot more than 25. We missed a 0, that's all. But remember, this is around 200. But popular ones are only 20 or 25. So these are what? The Linux? It is Linux, okay. So this comes as part of the Linux operating system, really, okay? It's not a C standard library, okay? So C standard library sits on top of this. Okay, so let's get back to our business. Yeah. Echo and sleep, when you type in command line, you're talking about? Echo is typically a bash shell thing. So echo, for example, when you type in, that's a bash shell cell built in. Okay. It doesn't invoke a system call. Well, indirectly it may invoke system call to write something to screen, right? Remember, echo is a command. Internally, it writes these characters to the screen, right? That will invoke a system call write internally. This echo is very high level. Below the carpet, there will be a write or something. There will be a system call involved. Remember, system calls are involved everywhere. Whether you may invoke it directly or not, somebody will be invoking it for you. Echo itself is not a system call. So sleep is very likely a system call, or wait it may be. There you go. There's some nano sleep. See, the sleep, it's good to be system call, because that way it can feed it into scheduler. That way you can really put the task to sleep without using the CPU. If it's not there, you have to implement it in the high level, you'll be using the CPU. Say, you don't want to use the CPU when some task is sleeping. Okay, so speaking of sleep, Let's look into that one, alarm.c. So here is a program, you fork. Now we are really going to, instead of user controlling, there's two tasks, and we are going to control from the child to the parent. So we are doing fork. 0 means child, -1 doesn't happen generally. So child sleeps for 5 seconds, sends a signal to parent. Get PID is a process ID. Get PPID, get parent's PID. Okay? So get the parent's PID and send a SIG alarm. And the parent is waiting for that signal, right? And it invokes a kind of pass. That's a system call. I think we saw that, I think. So, or if you don't do this, you'll be sitting in a while loop, right? You'll be grinding the CPU. You don't want to grind the CPU, unnecessarily, right? So the pass will really wait until some event happens, basically, right? So then it ends. So let's see. Need a kill -9, looks like. Four, 5, 9, 0. Okay, very good. So now alarm. The child is running, probably sent alarm. So let's do the VI that and make this 10 seconds. Okay, 10 seconds. Make alarm. So you can see the alarm, there are 2 tasks, right? 2 tasks, and 4 to 5, that's a shell, and a child is this alarm, that's a parent. How can I say that's a parent? That PID, PPI, parent ID is shell, and that PID appears here for the second one. So this guy is the child of the other one, okay? So alarm, what's happening here? Shell. It invokes it forks, right? Forks and creates the alarm. Shell and fork. How do you want to do it? Fork. Did fork and creates the. I know that's a good. I don't know whether we need to do even shell. We know how shell creates the one, right? So let's do the alarm. We start from alarm. Alarm. It forks, right? And parent and a child, right? And then later child, whenever it's ready, it sends a kill signal. So that's what the signals can do. They can send this one integer messages between the tasks, but you do need to know the task number. Otherwise, how will you send? Okay. So the child to know the parent number, and parent will know the child's number because the fork returns the child's PID. Okay. You can store that if you want to communicate with the child. Okay. So you can make this a little bit more fancy. You can even tell the child, go ahead and start the alarm, something like that, and then it starts the alarm, and then So initially there's no no sleep, no signal handling. Right here, only the parent is doing the signal handling, and the child is basically just sending the kill signal. Remember, kill doesn't mean kill automatically. Okay, kill means send a signal. That's all. It's a very bad names, I should say. Signal is not signaling, rather registration. Okay, so the term signal means you are registering a function for handling of specific signal. Okay, that's what we are doing. So then kill means send a specific signal. To another task. Okay? Questions? So this way you can do parent child. When you have multiple processes, you can communicate with each other. In fact, the thing I wanted to show you was we kind of got deviated is this signal numbers. See, these are all system defined ones, and somewhere down below I thought there was a user defined ones. This value should not be used directly at user level. 60 means 60 max. What does that mean? Sig user? No, it's not defined here. I've seen something like so sig unused and biggest signal. So totally 65 signals defined, and usually they define a range where users can define different meanings, and they can be just used for communication purposes, okay, instead of relying on the standard signals. So that's what we are using, sig alarm. Okay. There is a more special one, sig action. I'm not going to cover that. I guess can review that and maybe discuss it. So let's move on to threads. Okay. So what's the difference between task and thread? So let's draw a picture. Remember, a task means it has a global data memory, and a stack, and heap, not heap, the code area, data can be kind of global memory, and I guess the dynamic memory is heap, let's say. So the question is, what happens when you do a fork? This is one task, right? One task, this has these components, right? Memory components or memory segments. So this is where the code is, your executable code area. This is a global memory, global data area, global variables, and that's a dynamic variables. All the dynamic memory allocation. And here is the stack. Fork can occur any point, right? Your program is running, anytime it can fork, right? So this is the kind of thing you have, and let's say this task forks. So what will happen? Pretty much a duplication, really, right? That's what fork is. So when it duplicates, what will happen? Whatever you had, everything is duplicated pretty much. Of course, operating system is a little bit smart, or very smart. Code area, we know it's exactly same, right? It's a read only, right? So internally it manages with one copy. Remember we talked about that earlier, where the dynamic library or grep or any command, internally it's only one copy. For us it looks like two copies, but internally it manages with one physical copy. Okay, but bottom line is the fork does split everything, right? Okay, so the main thing we want to rely on, or the main thing you want to our focus is this data and stack. Okay, so let's focus on that. Code is not very interesting because it manages internally, and let's see what happens when you are doing adding a thread. By default, when your program is running, you have one thread. Okay, a single thread is running by default, right? So first you have a task which has code, and let's go ahead write everything again. Data, stack, and heap. So into this we are adding a thread. So what is duplicated? This is there for one thread, because by default every program means automatically one thread of execution. There you want to have one more thread of execution, one more parallelism, one more thread for the same process. Okay, we don't want one more process, rather one more thread within this process. So what is that one more thread requires? Which memory it requires? It requires something. Which one does it require? Who has worked with multi-threading? So what does thread has? It has its own personality, right? So what do we mean by personality? Its own variables, local variables, basically, not global variables. Global is shared. Okay? Unlike the forking two process where there's global variables separate. Here, global is shared, your own local. So which one has to be copied? Yes? Data is global. Yeah, they share. So you don't need to copy. You leave it as one copy. So locals are in stack. So yeah. So that's a thread number 2. Remember, the default was thread number 1. Okay. So creating a thread is lot simpler than doing forking. Okay, fork is lot more overhead, and thread is a lot simpler. Okay, the overhead is there's some computation somewhere you can see creating a task versus adding a thread. Okay, so that's why many times the threads, we use lot of threads. In the company's industry, thread is used lot more, wherever you are working with the same code within the application, lot of things going on, use multiple threads is a good way to manage that. Okay, so you have your own stack, that means you have your own local variable. There is one more thing, you have your own execution path too, right? Thread is a runnable entity, right? Its execution can be different from the other thread. That's why we created thread. We don't. Everybody need not follow the same path. In fact, when you have, for example, 5 threads of application, one thread can be in charge for user interface, one thread can be in charge for actual running, one thread can be in charge for network interface, like that. The Android phone, for example, let's say you send off your query to the web, let's say some database update or whatever you are querying. At that time, that becomes a separate thread at that time. Why? If you don't use a separate thread, what will happen is, in fact our applications do, is that they send a message to network, they wait for a response. A single thread can wait for only one response, meaning either network response or user response. See, when it's waiting for the user, the network response, if the user is doing this, it cannot handle it. Then you get that infamous message, application not responding. That means that they haven't implemented correctly. Okay? The correct implementation is that you should add a thread and do a network response. That way application can be waiting for input from the both user and the network. That way it gives a chance for the user to cancel. Okay? So basically you can just create threads temporarily and cancel it too. So now you can see that memory, when you memory wise the thread is a lot more efficient, but it creates a lot of confusion too. For example, global data. Now both the threads can update the global data. In fact, they can even try to update at the exactly same time. Let's say you are keeping track of some counter in the global data. Now both the threads, if they can update, right? Remember, updating a memory location, it's basically a fetch, increment and update operation, right? There are 3 operations when you increment a variable. You don't think about it all the time, but if you dig deep, let's say you're incrementing a variable in the global data area, it's really fetches the value and uses the CPU to increment and then writes back. If you have 2 CPUs, potentially both threads can do exactly parallelly. Write alone will be serialized, right? You cannot write into the same memory at the same time. Okay, there's a hardware limit, it ensures that. But that doesn't help much, you know. One write will be right after the other one. So you can read, what can happen is that a value to global variable, you can read, you will cover this later too. This guy reads and increments and then tries to write 3. Same time, this guy also read and increment to 3, it will write here. So that's the race condition. And really, it can happen, unfortunately. It can. So we are not, 99% of the time it won't happen, but it can. So we don't want to live with that 99% certainty, right? So those are the type of thing you have to be very careful about. How do they avoid in the real world? Well, if each thread is really responsible for different things, that shouldn't happen. Okay, number 1. Number 2, if they do update, same variable gets updated from multi-thread, then you have to provide some protection. That's something we'll cover a little bit later. Semaphores and taking turns, mutual exclusion and all that. Okay, wherever I leave it off, you will cover the rest in your operating systems course. Okay, so you can see some difficulties with the thread potentially, and what else can be trouble. So you can have, when you're adding a thread, actually you will get a new stack. Okay, you will get a new stack. Unlike the task where you don't copy the stack, because thread, you will see later, the thread we specify where to start, which function to start. So heap itself, well, heap, if this guy is pointing here, let's say, so basically that means this thread will not point to. On the other hand, if the data area is pointing to, then this thread will have access to. Okay. So it depends on where the pointer is. So this one thread, if this is the case, the thread 1's stack pointing, thread 2 will not have access. But the global memory, if it's pointed heap, then that becomes a global memory too, effectively, right? So depends on where this being pointed by. Okay. Okay. Initially, the threads were kind of implemented at the very high level, meaning the CPU or operating system didn't provide support. So there's another library, POSIX library. That's where the methods were created to kind of thread-like environment they created. But later, I think the operating systems started supporting it, and then they became very OS aware. Okay, OS aware type of mecha. So it kind of starts to look like a process. Okay, so that's what we will see. So I already explained why use threads. There is one example I gave in using Android operating system, right? If you have only single thread, sometimes it can become very complex. Very complex or are almost impossible to do the functionality, user specifications. For example, Android phone, if you are limited to only one thread, let's say your application, then application cannot be waiting for user input, also the network input. Okay, becomes very hard. You have to really come up with some really complex workaround. Okay, currently it's very easy. You create a new thread and network facing. So one thread is watching for the user input, another thread is watching for the network input. Okay, so if the user hits cancel, right, it can process that and it can send a message to the other thread and kill that thread, or tell it to kind of quit. Okay, or vice versa. So if you're not careful, the last statement applies. Using threads is equivalent to that. Okay, we'll kind of do a gentle start today and we'll go really deep in the next class. Okay, so let's look into this thread synchronization between threads. Yeah. The maximum number of threads, thousands, I believe. In the telecom system, for example, I have seen there's a thread for every call, something like that. So they use per transaction. Okay, let me put it another way. Let's take a better example. Web server. Web server. Let's say web server has 16 processors or something. Typically, you have a lot of processors, right? CPUs. So it makes sense to have at least 16 threads, right? 16 threads. So 16 web transactions can be processed truly in parallel, right? Of course, we also know transaction at times you have to wait for some data to come, or maybe reading disk or whatever. So it makes sense to have a lot more threads. 100 threads is very common. So it will look like 100 transactions are progressing in parallel, but in reality we have only 16 CPUs. They take time switching and all that. Okay, I have seen up to even 1,000, 1,000 threads. That's because again it's in telecom environment where 1,000 calls are going through. So 1,000 threads are there just to set it up, but the actual call processing happens by another box or something. They are just control processing, very limited processing. Just keep track of the information, 1,000 separate threads. Okay. Yeah, lots of threads it can handle. Okay, so let's start looking into these examples. Let's see. chapter 12 or 13. There you go. Thread 1.c. How do you create a thread? There are similar libraries out there. This is just one. Okay, this is one of the old mechanism. Pthread is POSIX thread. That's one of the standards they defined earlier. Some open, I don't know what it stands for. So here we are creating a thread. Little bit complex notation. That's a thread ID. We are going to get back, and that's where the thread will start. It's not a fork. Okay, we are telling the thread, hey, create a new thread, go and execute from there. So the new thread will run only here. Okay, it starts here. So for the new thread, this is like a main. Okay, the new thread, this is like a main for it. It starts here. Okay, with a parameter. That's a parameter we are sending. You can send a parameter, some message or whatever, a parameter value there, and we are trying to send, and then you can do this pthread join. It can create and it will start running. Then you can wait for that thread to come back and join the parent, in a sense, the main line. You can see the void star. Idea is that you get a pointer, then you can typecast it to whatever you want. Okay, void star is what is required by the pthread create, because this is a function pointer, right? See right here, this thread function, this function takes a pointer and returns a pointer. Okay, void star keeps things simple. Okay, as you need, you can change the typecasting and all that, you know. So as it comes in, see here comes in void star. You cannot work with the void star. You can just print it out. That's all you can do. So anything else, if you want to work with the values, you have to typecast it. So you're typecasting to character star. So then you're printing it out, and then you're sending back your message. Again, you're typecasting to void star, pthread exit. Okay. So what is this one? Thread 1. That's a library, pthread library -l pthread means library pthread you need to use. This one, it's called reentrant methods. You know, whether your function multiple threads can enter a function type of one. I won't worry about it at this point. Okay, so where were we? Thread 1. Okay, let's see, that's at sleep 3, right? So let's see, sleep 20. Thread 1. It's going to wait for a long time. Thread 1, let's go ahead, write it, put it in the background. There you go. Finally, we have a scenario where PID is two entries of the same PID. Now, this -L option shows something, a new term, LWP. Fancy term for a thread, lightweight process. The Solaris introduced this term, you know, because the thread was taken down all the way to operating system level. So now it became OS aware. So So this term, when your threads are used, that's the one very unique number. Okay, this is not a unique number anymore once the threads come into play. And this says how many threads. Okay, and how do we know which one is the default thread? Well, whichever one has the PID same as the LWP, that's the default thread. The LWP number is different, then that's not the default thread. There will not be a scenario where somebody else gets a 5322 as a PID. Okay, so really you can see this is the number that really operating system goes by. So let's say next process that comes in, they will get a 5323, not the 22 as the PID. Okay, to be very confusing, one thread has a 5322 PI LWP, some other task has 5322 PID. You know, that's not good, right? So this pretty much, this is the one really unique. Now we are revising our statement. You know, in a Linux system, LWP is unique, not the PID. Okay, but of course PID is unique per task. See, remember this is one task. They are not two tasks. That's one task. One task with two threads. Okay. Okay. Let's look at a more interesting example. Thread2.c, and here you have a message here, rather global variable run now and 1. So now they are going to check, they are creating a new thread, and these guys are going to take turns. They're going to tell each other, you know, run. They after running, the other guy will say run to the other one. So this is the thread 2, that originally is the thread 1. So anytime the run now variable is 2, this guy is going to print to 2, and then it's giving control back to the other thread. Okay, so let's run the thread 2. You cannot see. Two threads taking turns. Okay, so how does it work? Well, initially run now equal to 1, so it will come here, and run now equal to 1, it will print 1, and then print count, the variable is local variable is updated, right? That's a local variable, and then run now equal to 2, it assigns and get back right away here, and right away if it comes here, run now will be what? Just now it assigned to 2, right? So it will be 2, this will fail, it will go to else and go to sleep. Same thing for the other one. Run now equal to 2, prints 2, increments a variable, it gives the turn to the other thread and goes up, checks immediately whether is it my turn to run? No, because just now we made run now equal to 1, so it comes here and goes to sleep. Okay, so that's why that behavior you see. You see that slow? What can I do to speed this up? You don't want let's say two tasks are taking turns, you don't want this to be this slow, right? Let's say in your application, for whatever reason, let's say you want two tasks to take turns. You don't want to be this slow. What can you do to speed it up? So reduce the sleep time. Let's go here. How will I reduce? Comment it out. 0 sleep. Okay, now so time thread 2, very small time. The originally, what do you think the thread 2 will show for original program? The timing, time thread 2, what should be the output you think? It's printing how many times? 20 times. Yes? 20 times, so how much time? Sleeps for every time, so it should be 20 seconds or 40 seconds. Remember how the picture is, right? Let this go on. That's over. Try to draw the diagram, right? So here, let's say the common value, the global variable 1 changes to this thread 1, thread 2. Thread 2 looks at it, probably goes to sleep, and this guy sleep, right? So thread 1 gets it, makes it to 2, right? And then looks at it and goes to sleep. After it wakes up, so this one looks at it and it puts it as 1. So when it wakes up, this will be 1 because this guy would have woken up, hopefully. So then change it to 2, sleep. So you can see all it does is changes to 2, sleep, changes to 2, sleep. Now, this is a very negligible time, right? Changing 1 to 2 is a very negligible time, right? So that's what happens. So how many times it sleeps? 20 times. This guy also sleeps 20 times. So because of that, most of the time is by this. Most of the time both are sleeping actually, right? Remember this time is very small, so the most of the time both threads are busy sleeping pretty much originally. Because of that sleep time, right? Sleep time was 1 second, right? You can try to do some less. I don't think you can do less than that, 11, 16. Okay. So we'll continue where we left off. Okay. We'll stop right here. So to get more exciting in the next class. Okay.